In my travels around the world, I look for people, leaders, who look more broadly at their field. And the next segment is an excerpt from a series of excerpts from an hour-long interview I did with two phenomenal leaders from very different worlds in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. Owen Brennan, the chairman of Devenish Group, and his wife, Alice Stanton, who is a medical doctor and an expert in cellular therapeutics from the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, who also works in nutrition in Devenish Group. Devenish Group is in the agriculture space, and they bought this company a number of years ago. It was very, very small. Today it's a $300 million a year business growing rapidly, and given it's private, I can't tell you exactly the numbers, but the percentage of their business they spend, of their revenues they spend on R&D and people, think about Rita McGrath's comment earlier, is astounding. The type of work they are doing is profound and will affect all of us in the future. While you listen to these brief excerpts of our interview, I'd like you to reflect on how broadly and deeply they think about all the way from soil to human health at society level. So let's roll these excerpts.
I think we need to take a whole systems approach. We need to recognize all the constituents and their complexities in order to look for solutions for how we feed the world with nutritious food in a sustainable fashion. And we need to look at if the emissions, the carbon dioxide and the methane that has been produced by cattle is, and it is a problem, how do we reduce those emissions? And that's possible. And how do we sequester or store more carbon dioxide equivalents in our soils and in our hedges? So that's what Devenish is grappling with and is providing solutions towards, is addressing that complex system in a whole systems approach.
But I'm going to go with perhaps he would suggest that if we wanted to learn something new, we should read an old book. And my second alternative was going to be we should really pay a lot of attention to nature and try and figure out what nature has to say about the questions we have. When you think about those 19th century big thinkers, they were whole system people. They had a huge range of interests and activities and talents. I suspect we've become maybe a little too specialized individually and collectively. And there's a phrase for that which talks about we've developed this incredible ability to shine intense beam of light on very narrow subjects of interest. And I'm inclined to suggest that the solution to that is not to lower the intensity of the light, it's to widen the beam. Let's look a bit wider. Let's try and be a little bit less specialized. And so that's where some of the Darwin references were coming from. So could that challenge of nourishing all those people actually represent one of the biggest opportunities on our planet at this time? So we're going to need a lot of carbon to produce that high quality food affordably and in the sort of quantities we're considering. And if you track back to our focus on soil, the sort of numbers we look at today are that our soils contain somewhere between 2 and 3 times the amount of carbon that our enriched atmosphere contains. So if we could keep a little more of that carbon we're drawing down in our soils, we might be well on our way to tackling that problem of enrichment of our atmosphere with carbon. And when you think about it, a lot of that carbon that's up there that's causing a problem has come from the ground. So how about putting it back in the ground by mobilizing our soils? So addressing it in that way, a 25% uplift in our soil carbon would more than half our atmospheric carbon load. If you came to our Global Research Centre in Douth, one of the things we'd show you is what we call our multi-species pastures. So, as you know, monocultures don't occur in nature, and yet a lot of our farming and food systems are monoculture based and monoculture focused. And that applies to pasture just as much as it does to our croplands. So we've been looking at changing that and doing some multi-species comparisons. And those are very much focused on not just taking more carbon from the atmosphere, but also drawing our nitrogen from the atmosphere. And we've been amazed at the quantities those pastures are producing, which obviously means they're drawing down more carbon than currently is the case. But they're also drawing down huge quantities of nitrogen from the atmosphere, which reduces our dependence on inorganic nitrogen. So it's a double win. And just to make the additional point that we don't forget the nitrogen we take from the atmosphere is in fact organic nitrogen. So comparing organic nitrogen to an inorganic nitrogen is like comparing an apple with an orange. Organic nitrogen is in the form the plant wants, it's where the plant wants it. So it's, again, another win. I think the benefit of taking a more holistic view, widening the beam, is let's first consider how we can deliver these multiple outcomes simultaneously. So really good, affordable food, which is nourishing, really good environmental outcomes, water quality, good air quality, good soil health, very high level positive biodiversity outcomes. And time and again, when we do these optimizations at scale, we find not only is that perfectly possible, but success in one area feeds success in every other.
I'm going to take the pair of us as an example for hope. Up until 10 years ago, our careers were completely separate. Owen was in the agri-tech area and I was in the human health area, totally separate. But we started talking to each other and realized that actually what each of us was doing was having an impact on the other's world. So we're a small example of a multidisciplinary approach, and I'm seeing this in lots of places. So we are starting to see the soil scientists, the producers of food, the farmers, talking to the agri-tech people, talking to the food processors, to the retailers. We're starting to get the health professionals talking to each other first. So the nutritionists talking to the doctors and the nurses involved in public health, and eventually to the consumer. So I think we need both a whole systems approach and the multiple disciplines all starting to understand each other. So it's really valuable to me as a health professional to start to understand agriculture and to realize that actually agriculture, as well as producing emissions, can actually sequester carbon and at the same time produce really nutritious food.
Owen and Alice are two of my heroes in the food and agriculture space. Did you hear how broad and deep their thinking is, and the fact that they've grown together from disparate fields to focus on this very large, complex set of interlocking systems? By the way, the comments that Owen made about reading an old book, I asked him a question: what advice would your favorite author, Charles Darwin, give to us today? And that was his answer.